it's a setting that you'll be able to activate on your end if you do need those captions. Okay, without further ado, welcome. My name is Gianna Ritchie, and I am the librarian for the fine arts at New York University Libraries. I'm also a member of the CABC Planning Committee, and I will be the moderator for this session. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Center for Book Arts for their support of the CABC, as well as our additional sponsors, Deirdre Lawrence and the Grolier Club. The title of this year's conference is Artist Books as Expanded Literacy. Through the various panels and sessions over the last 2 days, we have and will continue to explore this question. How can artist books expand upon ideas of information and visual literacy, conceptions of language, data visualization, methods of presenting research, and beyond? This panel today will specifically discuss the intersection of artist books and neurodivergent literacy. I will start by introducing our 3 panelists, and then each one will give their presentation for about 20 minutes. After that, I will moderate a Q&A portion, so feel free to add your questions to the chat at any point during the presentations, and I will read them out loud to the panelists at the end. So with that, I will introduce our panelists. Our first presenter is Ari Wolff. Ari is an artist and educator based in Queens, New York. Her recent work has appeared in publications such as Asemics Magazine, Poetry Magazine, and the Graphic Score Exchange, and she has received support from Social Practice CUNY and the Vermont Studio Center. Our second presenter is John Bonanni. John is a poet and former special educator who founded and edits the Cape Cod Poetry Review. His poems have appeared in North American Review, Prairie Schooner, and Gulf Coast, among others. Our third presenter is Warren Lair. Designer, writer, and book artist known internationally as a pioneer of visual literature and design authorship, Warren's honors include Ladislav Sutner Lifetime Achievement Prize, Center for Book Arts Honoree, Brendan Gill Prize, 3 AIGA Book Awards, NEA Fellow, and grants from Rockefeller and Ford Foundations. He is a founding faculty member of SVA's Designer as Author/Entrepreneur MFA program, Professor Emeritus at SUNY Purchase, and co-founder of EARSay, a nonprofits organization in Queens, New York. So with that, I will turn it over to Ari, who is our first presenter.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you to Gianna and the Center for Book Arts. Honored to be on this panel with Warren and John. And I'm going to share my screen now. So I'm here today to talk about a project called Citation Needed. And so we're an experimental publishing initiative based in New York that develops artist books made by 3rd through 5th graders. Currently, we're based inside the 14th Street Y After School, and we also are in collaboration with Printed Matter St. Mark's. So within this class, participants experiment with typewriters and xerography, book arts, memes, comics, any kind of intersection between writing and drawing. And the classroom is really set up as a workspace, and children are self-directed. Before I dive too much into the pedagogy and kind of frameworks that I'm coming from, I wanted to just locate this within my practice. I'm a visual artist and have been kind of studying asemics or wordless writing for quite some time. This is a piece made out of polymer clay, just exploring kind of different modes of thinking about writing and reading and the different exchanges possible in the act of seeing. I have a reading disorder, a vision disorder more specifically, called convergence insufficiency. This makes it really challenging for my eyes to track when I'm looking at something close up. This made it really, really challenging to learn how to read, in addition to some other kind of learning disabilities that I was diagnosed with around the age of 9. Last year, I made this artist book, kind of conveying my experience with convergence insufficiency. It uses worksheets that I had to use as a young person to kind of correct my vision. And I made this through a process on the photocopier that I developed through layering and flipping and inverting, which really led me to understand the photocopier as an instrument for being able to share kind of different ways of seeing and artist books on a larger scale as a way to demonstrate kind of processes around reading. So I'm going to just go through some kind of questions that I was thinking through, a line of thought that I was really working with before starting Citation Needed, and then I'll share a little bit more about what the kind of outcomes were. So I think a lot of this practice grew from the question of how many ways of reading are possible, and thinking about ways not in a singular meaning, but through this kind of etymological definition of movement or travel, right? So both the travel of the eyes across the page and the mind as one is kind of reading and consuming. And what does it actually mean to read something? So a more traditional definition, right, might have us enter this kind of thinking around understanding something completely. In the English language, we read rooms, we read facial expressions, but this is still in some ways kind of a more traditional way of thinking about reading, because there's this huge gap in the mental interpretation of symbols. Like, what is actually happening there was kind of my question. So part of the genesis of this project was just me personally wanting to move away from this binary in literacy education, particularly around getting it versus not getting it, or there being a singular right answer, and moving more towards answers that are multiple and contradictory, and kind of allow for a level of failure. So I came to this definition just through my own process, kind of as I was working through these questions of reading as a way of gathering ideas, more of a set of techniques to collect and translate meaning in an ever-changing system or systems that are organized relationally between people and processed through sensory perception, right? I think we think about reading and it's so immediate for many of us. The translation is almost invisible. We don't even possess the ability to look at letters and see them as shapes, but really honoring this element of sensory perception that's present within the process of reading. So from there, I was kind of like, okay, a definition that's static and singular isn't working for me, and I think I need a web. And this is not an exhaustive web at all. But it helped me through the process of thinking through kind of what are all these different elements that are happening when someone is reading. So the perceiving of words through sound, or the perceiving of letter forms or characters through sight or touch, the translation of those units, the words experienced in someone's mind through imagined sound or other shapes or other thought forms, the interpretation of that meaning based on context or someone's lived experience, the punctuation or the imagined and implied tone, and then the interpretation of those elements. And in addition to these, there is so many other elements that I'm not making visible here. But some of the other pieces that I was really thinking through were these kind of physical distortions, right? For me, it was a visual distortion that I was experiencing when I was reading, cognitive distortions, unfamiliar words, how we're feeling, if we're cold, how the book feels, if we're being timed in our reading process. So all of these elements kind of playing into the ways in which someone reads, and then thinking about, for me as an educator, my students who were in the process of learning to read, and the kind of anxiety that something like this might produce when we make the assumption that it's kind of this singular or one-dimensional experience, which really led me to this question. How can reading and writing become playful processes in which making mistakes is normalized and even celebrated? For me, I experienced so much stress around making mistakes as a child. I avoided reading out loud. I faked it for a really long time. I had stomach aches all the time. And I think, right, there are so many things that our young people are dealing with right now. how can we make reading and writing something that is not so heavy and so singular that they can't play and that mistakes aren't really able to be integrated and normalized. So this is a publication from last year. I'll just read it to you because the picture is a little blurry. This was from a book called Questions. What? Why do we need air? Why do we need our Brian, which was intended to be brain, but we kept it as Brian because that was funnier. Why do we need money? Why are people racist? Why are people mean? Like, just why? I love this book, and it was made by a third grader, and really, really powerful. And we sold out on the first day of our book launch of this one. This is another really special publication from last year, the newsletter. It was an entirely asemic newsletter made by a fourth grader. So he had, I think I had brought in a Mirta Dermastace book, a famous artist who made asemic writing as kind of her main practice. And he was so excited about her asemic writing that every day that he came to class, he made more and more asemic writing. And over the course of the class, we built this newspaper, and then it was screen printed for us onto newsprint after we failed many times to put the newsprint through the photocopier and broke the photocopier trying to make that happen. We were able to have this screen printed, which was really exciting for Hugo and all involved. This is also a very popular title. It had a fold out. This is called The Book of 1000 Pikachus. This book had no words and was just a series of drawings of different Pokemon characters that this child had made throughout the year. And this is another image from last year. This was our kitchen sink book. We made it as a kind of a collaborative experience. And these are the pieces that broke out of the spiral binding machine, zoomed in on the copier, which, you know, was a very exciting image for us all. So a little bit about our materials interventions. I don't have a curriculum that I've written. This is an after school program. So the kids have gone through their days, many of them in charter schools where they're forced to sit for long periods of time, where they're performing, you know, pretty routine activities and, right, I think fairly oppressive spaces, to be honest. So when they get to the after school program, I really want it to be consent-based and for them to really be able to make choices and negotiate the workspace in the ways that they like. So I don't do a ton of direct teaching, but I do bring in a lot of different materials for them to review. And the kind of different technological pieces that we have, the photocopier, the typewriters, even rulers and pens have become, you know, just these teaching objects that the children use and experiment with, as well as just many books from my own artist book collection, as well as our titles from last year, poems by children, books about concrete poetry, etc. And I'm happy to send a reading list out if anyone is interested of the very specific things that we've looked at this year. So I'm going to just share a little bit about the pedagogical framework, and then I'm going to switch the mode that I'm sharing in and show you some of the books from this year. So kind of our main thing is mistakes are everything, right? That's the title of this talk. It was a motto that students started saying to each other, you know, just kind of unprovoked by me in response to how hard it was to use the typewriter and not mess up. It was such a frustrating experience for some people, but we started to really zoom in on some of the typewritings that were got you know, messed up with the photocopier and really use some of those mistakes as ways to make art. Spelling mistakes are included in a lot of our books. And that's just part of kind of what the children wanted and what I wanted for this project in terms of the expectations around things being right or wrong. We also are very experience-based, so I don't, as I said, don't do a ton of time talking at the beginning. I I think that just having people have the space to experiment and follow their ideas is the most important thing. I loved this quote from Mirta Dermasace. She taught the workshops of color and form in the 70s to adults, but she still had this very process-based framework. And one of the things that she would say was, don't worry about the outcome. You have your whole life for that. Now experiment. So that's something I've really tried to hold within this process as well. I really believe that learning and reading are social practices, right? These are relational ways of being and not necessarily individual processes, even though I think that's how, you know, our culture conceptualizes of learning and reading in a lot of ways. So as much as I can, I create space for students to read their work out loud. We write collaboratively. This year, my students were much more interested in poetry. So we started orating, and I would type the poem, and the children found it a lot easier to write out by reading out loud or speaking out loud. And so really kind of editing in real time and out loud as like a relational way of learning. I also love this idea of the rhizome, right? Like the root system that's bound and has many entry points. That was another foundational part of this project, was how can I make a book arts curriculum or, you know, framework more that has so many different ways that you can enter, that there's no actually wrong way to enter. There is no book that is not welcomed in this process, and children can kind of engage at their own level, at their own pace, where they want to be. That feels also like a really significant part of this practice. So some people work on their project all year, like the Asemic Writing newspaper was a full year project. That was the only thing that child worked on. There are a lot of other folks who have gone through 7 or 8 different projects, and then their book is a mashup of those, but I'm not really supervising how they spend their time. The only expectation is that they're respecting each other in the space, and that we're kind of managing noise levels so folks can focus. The typewriters can be very, very loud. We have 4 of them now. So that has become a little bit of a sensory experience that some people are not enjoying. So we've had some different typewriting in the hall or typewriting time where folks can have the different kind of focus spaces that they need. And then it's collaborative. So we decide together how we're going to spend the time, who's going to use the typewriters, if we're going to visit the photocopier, and how to allot the drawing materials. So anything that is really a choice, including the name of this project, was voted on and discussed by the group. So just a quick plug for our book launch. It's coming up next week, or no, 2 weeks. May 22nd from 4 to 6 p.m. we'll be at Printed Matter St. Mark's on the roof selling our books. Some of our authors will also be offering free life advice with the purchase of a book. So if you're seeking some advice from a 4th grader, come through. The books are really incredible, and I'm going to share them with you in just a minute. You can also find us. We just started an Instagram. And if you can't make our launch, we'll be at the East Village Zine Fair on June 15th. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing for just a moment here. And I'm gonna just flip to show some of the books. Oops. All right, can you all see my hand right now? Okay, great, thank you. So, Kyrie's Book of Memes. This is our meme president. This was an edit that just happened right before we produced this book. Warning, you may die laughing. So this is a child who was in the class last year and just joined us for the last quarter. and made all of these in about 3 weeks, which I think is pretty impressive. We have about 45 minutes together each week. So it's a really short class, and a bit challenging to get all the things done that we need to sometimes, but we're making it work. And I think I'm just excited about these moments where we're choosing to keep in something that was a scribble or kind of a less than intentional mark. I want to make sure that I get a chance to show a few more. So I'm going to move quickly through this, but this is someone who didn't want to use words at all last year. His book had no writing in it at all, and it was pretty exciting to have all this text. Kyrie is a 5th grader who lives in New York. He loves Oreos, making memes, and his friends. Kyrie is awesome. That is it. They are right now taking the state test, and there was a lot of frustration about this, and so we decided to make an edit of the state test. One of the kids wrote state test, but it came out state taste, and we thought that that was an incredible mistake and name for this book. So yeah, we were really kind of inspired by that. This is made using a flip function on the photocopier, so an invert function. These were all drawn with the black as white and white as black, but they kind of like this idea of it be the alternate being this inverted version. This was ripped in the copier, but yeah, just excitingly, we were able to put it back together. And yeah, I'm just going to read a little bit of this. The test might be tricky, but this is useless. The test is completely useless. We're trying to make a few things you feel useless. If you don't do the test, if you want, don't do the test. We will not care. If you are struggling, that's exactly what we want. We want you to feel dumb. The government did this to you. Don't pay your taxes. I had nothing to do with this. This was just, some release from this experience. Yeah, and some children, didn't want to participate in this. They felt like they didn't, it was, defacing something, but there were some kids who really felt like this was maybe the project that they were most excited to be in. And this is the one thing that I really did bring in. So this also just kind of shows some of the just wonder of the photocopier. They really wanted to have this rice cake interrupt the state test. So it appears on multiple pages. The zoom in, it gets really strange, and then they inverted it. So this was really silly. We laughed a ton. And yeah, a very, very fun project. I think my time is coming up soon, but I'll just show you a couple more. This is a young person who was in the class last year, so she really had a strong sense of what the project was and kind of what the parameters were. She made these drawings, and then we used a repeat function on the copier to allow them to be made into a pattern. And these books come in this little set together. And I think a couple more, I think in terms of just the ways in which young people are really thinking and processing. This book, sorry, I didn't show us the The flying donut, read bottom up, right? So we have a lot of these situations where we're reading something in a kind of reversed way, which I really like, and I think is, one of the ways in which they are really sharing the way they see the world. Donut, hey, my donut, it's flying away. Hey, and then that's the end. This is one of the books. And yeah, we, are sharing, and folks are entering this at whatever kind of capacity they have. So as our last book, I'll just share, this is a painting that a child made. It was an accident. They dropped a bunch of paint onto some paper and then we reversed it. This is her composition book. So it says, "Hi, I'm the author of this book. This book is about making a book. Just so you know, there are mistakes. The start is an idea, a simple drawing, a person, but it's not complete. There will be some boredom and there will be a lot of doodles." I love the spelling of doodles. I think we should vote to change the spelling. Doodles. You may want to throw stuff away, right? So they're really like working out the kind of process of making ideas. This one's really funny. They're going to be rips and coffee stains. I will explain more on the next page. Then we have some coffee stains, but they're actually just paint. Goals, finish this book. So this person just had a kind of stack of drawings that all lined up together, and we made this happen collaboratively at the photocopier when we printed her book. And as I'm here in this panel, many of these books were made by children who would be considered neurodivergent. Some of them weren't, but we're kind of all together in this space. And a lot of the framing and thinking around this process provide supports that I think are really valuable to everyone. This is just the last one that I'll show. The photocopier becoming a really important tool for folks, and the typewriter. Really working stuff out. This is a book about the world ending. But then we have this kind of interstellar spread as well. There's, the chaos and unexpectedness is definitely present. 4 is a 4th grader who loves art. 4 loves watching a mini series called BFDI, 4 likes to write. 4 also loves Olivia Rodrigo and Melanie Martinez. 4 was wild when they were younger, but is kind of chill now, yay. This is someone who is the 4th person with their name in our after school, and they've changed their name to 4. And this is kind of the first time that their name is appearing as 4, which is what they go by in my class, which I think is really sweet. So I'm gonna close there. I'm so excited to see the rest of what folks are sharing and to hear questions and get to look through the chat. Thanks again for this time and space and your energy here.
That was amazing. I am so excited to pick your brain later, possibly through emails, but either way. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna be sharing some research that I conducted in a substantially separate special education classroom. And so the title here is The Poetry Chapbook as a Writing Intervention for Writing Attitudes for Students with Severe Learning Disabilities. And I just want to get a little bit into the background of language prior to kind of like digging into what I was doing in the classroom to kind of explore what the chapbook could do. So in terms of like language domains, in terms of like learning, you have your expressive language, which is speaking and writing, and you have your receptive language, which is listening and then reading, right? So these are like the primary domains, and typically in like an English language arts classroom, you need to cover all of these. As we know, listening is central to kind of like a lot, because a lot of reading depends on phonemic awareness, which is that ability to kind of like discriminate sounds. And I think there's like 44 different like phonemes in the English language. Like we have an alphabet of 26, but there's a lot more sounds to that alphabet that kind of are related to the English language. And from that is going to often come writing, you know. So these kind of interact dynamically. But for the sake of this research, I was primarily focused on writing. So just a little background, these kids all had severe cognitive disabilities. They were referred to the classroom because they were 2 or more grade levels behind. They all qualified for portfolio-based state testing, as Ari had kind of mentioned. So what that means is that they didn't have to sit down and take the PARC or the MCAS or you know, that. Basically, I would have to assemble a portfolio every March and put these like bar graphs and tell them show them how they made progress. So my separate classroom had 9 students. It was co-taught by 2 teachers, myself and another one. And then we had 2 paraprofessionals, and we kind of broke everything up into these small groups depending on the varying levels. So I had 1 block of English and language arts that encompassed 3 students. At the time, we were using Project Reed's Framing Your Thoughts as a writing curriculum. It's very direct instruction, and it's meant to kind of tackle things at a very sentence level. So that lends itself to very little creativity, and I wanted to kind of like explore what was going to happen if I actually chose to do something different. So in terms of the case studies here, we had Sarah. She was a 7th grader. She had intellectual impairment, and she was reading at a 3rd grade level. Her reading fluency was pretty low. Natalie was an 8th grader. She had traumatic brain injury, and she was reading at a 4th grade level. And then Anthony was another 8th grader. He had autism, and he was reading at a 3rd grade level. So those are the kids that were involved in this project, the students. So the real question here was, can a creative writing intervention using poetry and chapbook self-publishing be effective in improving writing attitudes and or skills for students with severe cognitive disabilities? And, you know, again, this is case studies, so it's just these 3 kids that I'm looking at, but can it speak to other research? You know, that's always what you're looking for in action research, which typically occurs in classroom settings. So I looked at attitudes and I looked at skills. So I looked at attitudes with surveys, norm referenced surveys that had already been done, my own survey, and then I looked at skills using a rubric. Let's see. So just, I'll go over like a quick literature review. I didn't include everything that I looked at, you know, prior to implementing the intervention, but basically, Keir, Kaufman, McKenna, and Ambrosia developed this writing attitude survey that for grades 4 through 12. It's a really, really excellent tool to use prior to engaging in curricula, because it's very accessible. It's got these like Garfield characters for like disgust or like pleasure, and they suggested using the survey to measure effectiveness with educational interventions, and that's what I used, and it was pretty helpful. Lots of questions on that, and easy to use. And then these guys, Graham, Collins, and Rigby Willis, they did this meta-analysis of different studies. And they found that learners with disabilities evidenced less mastery or facility on basically like every writing outcome, including their demonstration of low motivation and self-efficacy. And a lot of that came down to text production, which is basically the fine motor skill. Can you grip your pen? You know, and that's going to come up later. So I just want to highlight that. So students with documented learning disabilities show negative attitudes toward writing. I always knew that, but these, you know, within this study, it's very proven. And then Santalego confirms students who struggle with writing, including those with learning disability, hold a less positive view of the process than that of their peers who are skillful writers. She further reviews evidence that student attitude molds writing development. This is also really important, and that's kind of the framework that I was operating within. How do attitude and writing development kind of interact? Because it is a solid predictor of future writing performance. So this was kind of central to the study. Sadler conducted a replica. I was really looking for like other people who had done the same thing or something similar, and it was really hard for me to find. But this guy did a replica study of something called self-regulated strategy development. So that's basically where you provide a background, you discuss, you model, you have the kids memorize, and then you support them, and then you kind of offer some independence within that. So he did that with narrative writing. But I was looking specifically at poetry, and my curriculum kind of mimics that structure in a lot of ways. Writing attitude was not measured here, but I wanted the kind of structure of that, like pre-post intervention, to see what was going to happen. So this again is that framework, right? It's the writing cycle. What's your attitude toward writing? If you have a bad attitude toward writing, oftentimes that affects the ability of your writing. Then it's going to affect your outcome. And then that's going to affect your attitude again. So this is a cycle. And sometimes it starts here with ability, right? I'm looking at middle school. So, you know, I think it's important to highlight the need for early intervention because of what's happening here. So the methodology, this is basically the curriculum. And if anyone wants like the curriculum, I'm happy to share it. I would love to know if you use it. And I would love to know the results just because I'm curious. But this was just like the initial data collection for writing attitudes. I wanted to know what their attitudes were. I wanted to know if they were interested in poetry at all. And I wanted to understand the ability. So in order to do that, I initiated that writing attitude survey. It's norm referenced. It's that one with the Garfield characters. It has this Likert scale. So it's like 1 to 4, you know, I hate poetry. I love poetry. And then you have, I initiated my own poetry survey on Google Forms. I was very kind of just really basic questions. And again, that one used a Likert scale as well. And then I asked them for baseline writing samples. So, you know, write me a poem, and I gave them a prompt. And then I graded that with my own rubric. So again, these are kind of like my baselines. And then I wanted to see, you know, if this curriculum could have any effect on them. So this is the writing attitude survey that I had mentioned earlier. And it's just really easy to kind of initiate in any classroom. How would you feel if you had a job as a writer for a newspaper or magazine? I'd feel great. I'd be angry. I'm ambivalent, you know. So how would you feel about writing a story instead of doing homework? And, you know, what's great is you can read this to them. They can, a lot of the language is sight words. And because of that, it makes it a lot more accessible. And you can really give it to any grade level. This was kind of my rubric. So, you know, I graded them on form. Did they understand the form that they were using and how they were using it? Vocabulary, you know, is it basic? Is it precise and vivid? These kind of poetic techniques. Are they using personification and things like that? Figurative language conventions. Just kind of like, did they know what they were doing with the conventions or not? And then, the effort always, student motivation. This here was my survey. So, I like writing, strongly agree, strongly disagree. And again, like these are simplistic to make it more accessible. I think a lot of times as teachers, we think that providing like wider vocabulary is better for them, but not in a situation like this. I just want to know what their opinion is. Why make it hard? I like reading poetry, strongly agree, strongly disagree. And so this was just kind of like questions 1 to 11 to kind of just get a sense of whether they liked poetry specifically, because again, I wasn't finding anything in the current educational research that had something like this. So I figured I'd make it more narrow and make it myself. So this is kind of like the curriculum. For the methodology, I did the Exquisite Corpse with them, like providing that collaborative poem. They thoroughly enjoyed this. I might actually read one. Yeah, actually, I'm going to read one now. So this was just kind of like one that we did together. I'm always running. When I think about my coat, I always think of it as a dog. I always think of it as running away from LeBron James onto the court of cold. So I had to wear a sleeveless shirt. So I had to wear shorts and a tank top and a necklace made of roses. As soon as the judge of John Cena saw me, I wore his hat on my body. They really enjoyed these exercises. We would often do them. We do collaborative stories. We do collaborative poems. I think that's really helpful. And again, intervening on that attitude. The personification poem. This was as I don't think I provided it in the appendix here, but like it's basically like a graphic organizer, which for those not speaking teacher language is like a table. Insert table. 2 columns, multiple rows, and then a word bank. So the word bank had things that are like specific to humans, talks, whispers, dances, and then they had to kind of go outside and look for inanimate objects like trees, the trash can, and things like that. Then we did a high bun. This one I was unsure about. It's probably the more complicated of I thought it would be a good transition from that sense of like prose into poetry, because it's both. You have these prose blocks followed by the haiku. So I think it might have been a little confusing for them because I think they like to see poetry as something that's like broken up into white space, but I thought it might be a good transition. So, but I actually got some beautiful high buns out of them. And then day 4 was the sonnet. I used a graphic organizer. Again, that's like just like rows for 14 lines. I didn't abide by any of like those traditional rules of like meter or anything like that. Sonnet is 14 lines and it needs to be about love. That was my kind of like goal there. And then we did our publication through chapbook making, and then we kind of did our own reading. So the chapbook instruction, the way I kind of handled that was students typed their poems in a Google Doc, then they shared it. The teacher designed the book using Microsoft Publisher while projecting the process. So while I was doing that, like this is just this very kind of like noisy classroom, which was great. I was projecting what I was doing in Publisher, the copying and the pasting, showing their poems. Students that required help typing received it. So if they were kind of hunting and pecking a lot, we had to do this, over the course of a few days. So I just wanted to ensure that they got the help they needed. And then students who finished were assigned roles. So typesetter printmaker or paper cutter. So the printmaker basically designed the cover. And the way I did that was by using like these foam core kind of things from that you get like in meat packaging. And you can carve into them and then you roll it on top of the on top of a piece of paper as kind of like a repeatable image that you can use on multiple chapbooks. The paper cutter was cutting up, measuring the paper to ensure that we had covers for the chapbook. And then the typesetter was helping me with copying and pasting in Word and proofreading. So together we folded and collated the pages. That was super fun. And I think they started to kind of realize, they started to kind of like exercise a lot of organizational skills with that. And then the saddle stitch, which is a gift to any classroom. That's what these look like. You can kind of like put it underneath and then, hammer it in that way to get your binding. And this is what it looks like. And I love, echoing what like Ari was saying, like the perfect mistake. This is supposed to be a compass rose, kind of as the cover, but it was just messy and beautiful and vibrant as it should be, and then, they open it up and then there's, oh, that's not coming out well at all. But these are some of the poems there that I can read. We did, haiku. I'll read one of the haibun. This is by the kid with intellectual impairment. A trip to Canada. The trip was long but fun. It was very cool but weird and especially relaxing. I did lots of stuff like Upside Down House, mini water park, the Tip restaurant with fireworks, and a nice walk with my grandpa. It was cold but fun. Upside Down House, weird and cool. A walk with grandpa. And I got some interesting sonnets, a few about video games. This one was by the kid with traumatic brain injury. United States, 1 billion people, but only one I love. She is my flower, but she has not blossomed yet, so I wait till she does, but she does not blossom for me, so I keep on waiting for it till I can't wait anymore. But I'm running out of time, but I still wait. And these personification poems were pretty strong as well. This is by the kid with autism. The earth. Stars show dreams. The night shows stone. Tell history. The sea murmurs. Dawn whispers. The moon sleeps. Sun awakes. The sky looks. Mountain teaches. The morning sings. So the final data collection was like, I looked at the writing samples again. I graded them with the same rubric. So it was a similar writing prompt that I did in the beginning of the curricula. And then I re-administered that writing attitude survey. I re-administered the poetry survey, and these were the results. So the writing attitude survey, pre is the blue, and then post is the orange. So the kid with intellectual impairment had a less strong writing attitude. The kid with traumatic brain injury, his attitude went up slightly. And then the kid with autism went up a lot. And looping back to that initial research, the kid with the intellectual impairment and the kid with traumatic brain injury both had occupational therapy goals that included handwriting. So having that occupational skill kind of echoes the research. This was poetry. The kid with the intellectual impairment doesn't like it anymore. Kid with traumatic brain injury doesn't like it anymore. Kid with autism loved it. So, when you get results, this is what happens. Some of these kids could have had a bad day. Maybe these are just their honest opinions. I'm working with middle schoolers, right? However, their ability went up. All of them were writing better afterward. The kid with intellectual impairment had the most improvement. The kid with traumatic brain injury had marginal improvement, and then the kid with autism skyrocketed. Like he just, I mean, it was amazing to see where he went with his work. So this is just kind of like a summary of what had occurred based on the writing outcomes and the attitude outcomes. The kid with autism was the most successful here. So in terms of like analysis and reflection, explicit instruction may be more beneficial for kids with intellectual impairment. That kid with intellectual impairment was really digging the project read curriculum. Project-based work oftentimes requires a lot of inferencing. So kind of like helping to guide them through that is super important. And then the scores reflect that much of writing attitudes among students with disabilities relies on text production, that OT skill. Sarah's writing speed is much slower than the others. Anthony's, the kid with autism, his writing fluency is so much faster. And then both Sarah and Natalie had OT goals focused on handwriting. We need more studies regarding poetry and bookmaking as a tool for improving writing attitudes, particularly among kids with autism. If Anthony improved that much, maybe this could be successful elsewhere. And then interventions toward improving writing attitudes among learners with disabilities should definitely be implemented at a younger age. That occupational skill is super important. And then this was interesting, that finding that it's inconsistent with that theory that writing improvement leads to a better writing attitude. There needs to be a time frame between that, right? If all of these kids improved so well, then why didn't their attitude improve? Maybe that will come later. I'm not sure, but that needs to be addressed in further research. And that's about it. I look forward to any questions, and thank you. Oh, Warren, you're on mute, I think.
I'm on mute, and you're still sharing your screen, John.
Oh, yeah, let me stop that. Thanks. Boom.
And hi, everybody. Thanks so much to the CABC committee for inviting me. It's an honor to be on this panel with Ari and John. Your talks were so inspiring, and your teaching methodologies and outcomes, amazing. Let's share the screen and go to play. Okay, can everybody see that? Can you see something that says portraying War and Peace?
Yes, we see it.
Yeah. My talk will focus on my own practice, writing and designing artist books that portray and evoke human experiences that are often misunderstood, including neurodivergent experiences. I'll also sneak in a few thoughts I have about other ways artist books help expand literacy. When I was a kid, I was considered a slow learner. I doodled incessantly and I read very slowly because I silently acted out every word of a text, whether it was a history textbook, a newspaper article, or work of fiction. I also have synesthesia, a confusion or blending of the senses, where among other things, I connect words to color and music and taste sounds. I think all children are born with these very fluid connections between the senses. But as we get older, our educational and social systems force us to segregate most things into cubby holes: boy, girl, art, science, emotion, logic, writing, picture making. By the time I went to college in the 1970s, I was a painting and drawing major. On the side, I wrote a lot, mostly poetry and short stories. As much as I tried to adhere to the cubbyholes, letters and words kept making their way into my picture making. One day, I met with a painting teacher and showed him a secret stack of drawings that combined abstract marks, letter forms, and made-up words. This is one of those drawings. He looked through the stack, shook his head, wagged his finger in my face, and said, "Warren, you're barking up the wrong tree here. Never combine words and images. They exist in two different spheres of the brain. They're two different languages." I left his office feeling like I'd been given a mission in life. And I've been combining words and images or making images of words ever since, for better or worse. Several years later, I went to grad school for graphic design to learn how to make my own books and multimedia projects. My thesis, which was also my first offset printed book, was a performance score for 8 two-person conversations. I described it as a study of human dialogue and a celebration of the music and poetics of speech. This book began a lifelong obsession and way of writing for voice, on the page, for the stage, through typography, inspired by prismatic characters in everyday discourse. I set each character in a different typeface, and the choreography of each dialogue on the page reflected the kind of interaction between the characters. On this page, you have a religious missionary talking around an unsuspecting subject. I didn't use punctuation, but broke lines significantly, as in verse, indicating pauses of breath or thought. And I only list the name of each character once at the top of the page. Printed on translucent paper, you see and hear approaching and receding conversations. Here's a married couple arguing in French, occasionally coming together in laughter. They continue arguing while these other two people flirt with each other on the same wavelength. Here, the dialogue between two Chinese speakers moves from right to left on the page as the English speakers move from left to right. I orchestrated multiple conversations at the same time, which built up till you had all 8 pairs talking at once. So beginning with that very first book, I was interested in evoking these different kinds of experiences, or not just evoking, but creating experiences on and through the pages of a book. My next book, employed a similar approach with emphasis on interior thought more than conversation through 7 characters who inhabit the same building over the course of one day. Explored those synaptic gaps and utterances between thoughts and speech that bridge our sometimes imperfect search for meaning, and a desire to connect with others, French Fries, co-written with poet and journalist Dennis Bernstein, is a book that's also a script for a play that takes place at an American fast food joint. Each character is not only set in their own typeface, but also color. The text is illuminated with icons and images that evoke the fast food tableau and the internal projections of the characters. Before the playbook begins, one of the customers is found dead in a pool of blood and ketchup. Each character bears testimony to a different perspective of how and why she died. In Act 6, one hell of a political argument breaks out. This was 1984, the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And these pages reflect the kinds of intense arguments of the time. Throughout the book play, the character, Louise G. Alonza, is working on a book called The Potato in America, in which, among other things, she foretells spuds that are genetically engineered to repel unwanted pests. The graphic composition of my work in the 1980s and early 90s truly reflected the layered, often nonlinear way I experienced the world in my 20s and early 30s. But as I became more serious as a writer and cared more about the subjects and themes I was portraying, my approach to the visual composition evolved, beginning with an idea for a series of books based on real people who straddle the wobbly line between brilliance and madness. And each book would be proportional to a standing figure with a photograph of the person on the front, from the front cover, from the back on the back, and inside the guts, first-person monologues, vignettes, and short stories. The first 4 books in the series formed a quartet of men, which I went around doing readings and performances of. I had so many rich stories, I actually started using a column of text, but I still didn't use traditional punctuation. In Claude's book, I used slashes to indicate thought pauses, important memories and epiphanies pierce the walls of text. Here, Claude, a survivor of child sexual abuse, struggles to make sure there is no cycle of abuse. He finds himself homeless and meditates on how it happened. One of the books portrays a dear friend, amazing musician, and brilliant thinker, Charlie Lang, who has also struggled with bipolar disorder for much of his life, misdiagnosed at 14 years old as having schizophrenia. His book is illuminated with his own drawings and covers some very difficult years, getting sent to a military academy. On the left, being in the eye of an emotional tornado during his second year at the Berklee School of Music. On the right, getting stuck in a bad cycle in and out of emergency wards, psychiatric centers, and halfway houses. The good news, Charlie has been living independently for many years, recording his music, making art, and we remain close friends. To some extent, he credits the portrait book for helping him see that he was allowing his disability and the mental health industry to define him. He's long since figured out ways to manage his condition and even thrive. You can listen to some of Charlie's music at soundcloud.com/ChazLang. After I met and then married the actor and oral historian Judith Sloan, the first book in the women's portrait series morphed into a solo show and radio play inspired by Andrea Gibbs, a white deputy sheriff in Mississippi, who, along with 3 black deputy sheriffs, blew the whistle on brutalities and murders perpetrated by law enforcement officials in youth detention centers and county jails. The next documentary project Judith and I worked on documents new immigrants and refugees who we met in our home borough of Queens, New York, the most ethnically diverse locality in the U.S. Crossing the Boulevard, strangers, neighbors, aliens in a new America is the result of interviewing and getting to know hundreds of people from all over the world a year and a half before 9/11, 2001, and a year and a half after. Our focus was on people who arrived post-1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, which forever changed the demographics of this country. Open the book, you're going over the Triborough Bridge towards Queens. You're out on the street crossing the boulevard. At 13 lanes wide, crossing Queens Boulevard can be treacherous, but crossing out of war zones, economic hardships, across borders, oceans, cultural and language divides, into the fabric of America is the crossing we were most interested in. Most importantly, meet each of the 79 people profiled in the book via their photographic portrait, surrounded by their story, told in their own words, and reproductions of objects and images they carried with them from home to home. Divided into 5 chapters, there are stories about people who came to the U.S. seeking religious freedom, political refugees and asylum seekers, many of whom ironically fled countries where political persecution, war, even military dictatorships were supported in part by U.S. foreign policy. There are stories of families separated and reunited, generational gaps and bridges, traditions abandoned and rediscovered. There are neighborhood stories, and the great hope of our close to home journey is meeting people who come together from many different countries because of something they share in common, like politics, attending an international high school, or playing music together. I've always included instructions on how to read my books, and since Crossing the Boulevard was published by W.W. Norton, a mainstream mass market press, I thought it was particularly important to include some notes on how to read a book that juxtaposes multiple perspectives, sometimes on a single page, etc. Since it was an opportunity to reach readers who weren't necessarily versed in artist books or avant-garde literature. Happily, Crossing the Boulevard has been used as a common reader in several colleges, a text in high schools and ESL classes, and was even included in training kits for interns at Mount Sinai and Elmhurst hospitals. We never used the term artist book when we were looking for a publisher, but I think of Crossing the Boulevard as one example of how artist books have the capacity to communicate in ways that commercial genre-bound conventions don't generally make room for. There's no doubt that artist books have served as an experimental laboratory for the publishing industry, especially as the digital revolution has thrust writers, publishers, and booksellers into confronting existential questions about what a book is and what distinguishes it from other vehicles of transporting text and data. Another way that I think artist books have helped expand literacy is through connections made between the physical book and other manifestations of a project. The Crossing the Boulevard project included an audio CD, public radio documentaries, animations, performances, and an exhibit that premiered at the Queens Museum of Art and traveled to 15 locations around the country, and included a mobile photo story booth where visitors could add their own migration stories. Nearly a decade after the book came out, we were commissioned by the Queens Symphony Orchestra to create a symphony about the immigrant experience in Queens. Judith wrote the libretto, Frank London composed the music, and I designed expressionistic super titles, which were projected above the orchestra and a 150-voice choir. In 2016, after Trump was elected president and declared a Muslim ban, we mounted a 17-window installation on the ground floor of CUNY Law School in Long Island City based on the anthem at the end of the symphony, which is Judith's reimagining of Emma Lazarus's New Colossus poem that's on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. As part of that installation, we updated our immigration timeline that appears in the back of the Crossing the Boulevard book, which, among other things, exposes just how nakedly racial and ethnic U.S. immigration laws and policies have been since the beginning, and how they've ebbed and flowed between contraction and expansion to this day. So full circle, community, book, different manifestations of the project, back to the book, and the community from which it springs. My illuminated novel, A Life in Books, The Rise and Fall of Blue Mobley, pairs the memoir of my fictional author protagonist with a retrospective of all 101 of his books, their cover designs, catalog copy, and excerpts that read like short stories. The novel explores the intersections of life, art, and literature, and has a lot of neurodiversity. But in the interest of time, I'm going to share a little bit of Five Oceans in a Teaspoon, another collaborative book with Dennis Bernstein. His poetry, my visualizations. I looked through thousands of Dennis's short poems written over 45 years, and I ended up selecting and visualizing 225 of them into a book that reads like a memoir in short visual poems. Divided into 6 movements, the book spans a lifetime, growing up confused by dyslexia and a parent's alcoholism, graced by a mother's compassion, becoming a frontline witness to war, to love and loss, open heart surgery, caring for aging parents, and visitations from them after they're gone. The goal of my typographic settings is to give form to the interior, emotional, and metaphorical underpinnings of Dennis's writing and engage readers to become active participants in the discovery and experience of each poem, starting with the very first poem in the book, Dyslexia. I answer to many names, but the alphabet confuses me. Every day I drown in 26 sounds, and I've never been able to stay between the lines. The effects of dyslexia on Dennis's life and of remaining undiagnosed for so many years reverberate throughout the book. Free 'em all. Mad Boy has been threatened with suspension for breaking open the jars of boy bee catchers and freeing the pollinators. He was sent to the principal for refusing to apologize. He told the principal that he would like to be in suspension. He'd be happy to close his eyes and float around for a few days. Pain relief. Mama was the pin cushion of compassion we all stuck it to. Skip over these. A vowel. The alphabet is segregated with a small minority calling the shots. I think it's fair to say that Dennis felt really seen and understood by the visualizations of these poems. That's not to say that they're easy for him or anyone with dyslexia to read, a distinction I want to acknowledge. Perhaps the best outcome for these now visual poems is to create greater awareness and empathy in the consciousness of neurotypical readers. I'm going to jump to the last movement of Five Oceans in a Teaspoon, which has poems about aging, Dennis's own open heart surgery, and his parents' Alzheimer's. I made animations of over a dozen of the poems from the book, which enabled me to bring out other dimensions of the poems. Here's the animation of the poem, Living with Alzheimer's. Music soundtrack by Andrew Griffin. More recent collaborative books with poets Adina Karasik, published this past October, and Rick Black, not yet published, and my forthcoming Jericho's Daughter, a collaboration with the painter Sharon Horvath, all have aspects of neurodivergent experiences. But I'll leave you with a glimpse of a forthcoming book that's launching simultaneously with Jericho's Daughter at the Center for Book Arts on May 31st. Riveted in the Word is an electronic artist book inspired by a woman I know, an American history scholar and professor who had a devastating stroke. My personalized story is about a writer's hard-fought battle to regain language after a massacre. So to the theme of this panel, I chose to make this video in order to place the reader inside the mind of the she recalls her rehabilitation. Created for mobile devices, computers, custom made in collaboration with programmer Artemio Morales, toggles between columns text to read at their own pace, and animated sections that evoke gaps inside a mind with broca aphasia, full of perceptions, thoughts, memories, and desires, which struggling mightily to find words needed to communicate. Original soundtrack, again by Ultimately, Riveted in the Word is a story about overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. And I'll conclude with this clip that picks up toward the end of a section where Nora Hansen, PhD, thinking about her decades-long rehabilitation, recalls the moment she first spoke again. Thank you. Stop my share.
That was really moving. Thank you, Warren.
Thank you. I hope the audio was okay on that.
Yeah, I could hear it well. Okay, we have a few questions that came into the chat. Thank you all, first of all. Thank you all so much for your amazing presentations. They were all really, really thought-provoking, and I feel privileged to have been able to listen to them all this afternoon. So before I address the questions that have come in or the ones that may be percolating in people's minds, I wanted to check in with the three of you and see if anything came up for you during each other's presentations that you wanted to ask each other, or, you know, if you've been thinking about each other's work over the past few weeks and want to ask any questions now. The floor is yours.
Warren, what programs do you use for the visual, the kind of audio visual movement of text? And
well, I storyboard sometimes by drawing, and then in InDesign, and I make these pretty detailed storyboards, and then I work with an animator who uses After Effects.
Okay.
And we go back and forth. And of course, you know, sometimes scanning things and in the process. And I have a question.
Sorry.
I have a question for, well, although I did learn back in college animation with the Bolex 16mm camera and 24 frames, 12 drawings per second. But now using these digital tools more. I have a question for the two of you. I teach too, and I didn't talk about my teaching, but I was so impressed with both of your pedagogy, and I wonder if you're able to tell if the kind of breakthroughs that you've made with students and the kind of freedom and license and space that you create in your classes for them to make mistakes and to experiment and to break these binaries that we're so trained into, if you're able to tell when they go back to the other kinds of educational modalities, the other classrooms and the rest of the world out there doing all this programming upon them, how long lasting you think the breakthroughs that are happening in your classes have on them.
John, do you want to go first, or?
No, you go first.
Okay. I mean, part of the reason I have so much freedom is because I'm working in informal education in an after-school program. So the kids come from schools around the East Village and Union Square, and I have no connection to their teachers, and I really have no way to tell what the impact is. I strongly believe that if there was some kind of assessment, that they would show more positive attitudes towards reading and writing. But you know, I can't say that with certainty at all. But I do think, yeah, I believe it's there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like the moments for me are like, yeah, those kind of aha moments in a classroom where a kid starts to get it, you know. What's hard is definitely the long haul. The longer that we teach, I think like we get to kind of like experience that moment where a kid graduates high school and like returns to the middle school just to say, hey, Mr. B, I graduated, you know, and like those are the real moments because they're returning for a reason. They're proud of themselves. They want you to share in that excitement. And you, despite all of the tears and, you know, the pains of middle school, they're thankful for what had occurred. And yeah, just you know, watching them grow later on, you know, I think it's more of the longitudinal aspect of it. And then for me, like what started to lead me into kind of like another direction was this study, which is like self-determination among kids with disabilities, because I started to see a lot of kids that were struggling with identity. You know, what does it mean to be somebody with a disability? How do I navigate that marginalization? And I started to integrate curriculum that had more disability awareness, more figures that they could kind of latch onto to be seen, which is a very roundabout way of answering your question, I think. But yeah.
No, that was really
That's
helpful.
beautiful. That's beautiful, John. Yeah, I think one other thing just came to mind is just like, I think less than maybe literacy, there's like an increase in self-worth. And that it also comes, I didn't really get to talk about the book launch. It's like the end, the kind of culmination. It comes when you're holding a stack of something that you made and people are coming, artists are coming and asking you questions about it. And it's like, there's a level of just kind of, yeah, validation and selfness that happens that I do think is probably pretty consistent among folks. I have a question for you, Warren. You talk so much about collaborating with folks, right? So much of your work is this exchange. And I just wanted to know more, particularly in the portrait series, or I don't know if I'm getting the name right, but yeah, how you negotiated making those books alongside folks, if they were looking at them, if they're, you know, what that kind of exchange process, or if you were just kind of like given the full freedom to create and, you know, then you came back together after it was developed.
Well, that was an 8-year process of me hanging with all of them simultaneously during that period of time, plus teaching full time and working on other things as well. And it was a process of developing trust, really hanging out with folks more than interviewing them per se. Got release forms, which included the option for them to review and look at the entire manuscript before it went to press. And some pieces got pulled back in some of the books because folks felt uncomfortable, although all of these folks are very much people who wear their emotions on their sleeves and were engaged with me because they felt okay about sharing their life stories. One of the 4 people was a very good friend of mine, and he refused to look at the manuscript, and he just said, "Our friendship depends on how you represented me." So that was frightening and sort of strange. And but our friendship survived that. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank
But
you.
the other thing that I'll say is that they're not straight transcripts or word for word reproductions of what the people say. I took liberty. I told them from the very beginning, like a, let's say, contemporary painter might do when they're having someone sit for a portrait. But I really tried to get to their truth. But in things like interior prayers to God and other ways of piecing stories together, which don't always come out in a linear beginning, middle, end, but I pieced it together over a period of years. Oh, that's a story, and here are the pieces.
Thank you. I want to make sure we get to the questions in the chat. There were a couple from the same person who I'll put them together. They're for you, Ari. They ask, how do you do the mock-ups for the zines or artist books? Analog and creating a dummy or on the computer? And then they also asked how it's printed because it has sort of a grainy look to it, like as if it were a riser print.
Yeah, great question. I think that person is not here anymore, but you know, maybe they are and I'm not seeing
They
them.
are, yeah.
I'm sorry. You have your camera on. So hi, Juliana. Okay, great questions. So everything is printed on a Canon Image Runner photocopier. We have two at the community center where I work, and this project hinges upon the unlimited use of these copiers and also just the incredible photographic nature and that also like Riso, yeah, kind of textured thing. You can do single color copies. So after like working there for a while and just, you know, revenge printing on this copier, I really like the program kind of came out of that access and taking students up to the copier to experiment. Everything is analog. It's really so much work. But it allows them to be so much more involved in the editing process. And I'm still, you know, this is the second year, this is our second edition. I'm still doing a couple prints like right now. And it takes a while, and the evolution is definitely a time consuming part of it. But you know, for now, that's where I'm at, and doing it in a digital way would kind of remove them from the process on some level. We don't have enough computers. I don't even, you know, I don't even have Photoshop. So it's just, yeah. And they're also learning, you know, I think the tools are transferable. I'm using language that is Photoshop language a little bit with them as we're printing. And so and risograph. So I think I hope that maybe some of them will be able to apply that knowledge once they're older and if they're using those programs. Yeah.
Thank you. There was another question in the chat for you, John, and it said, love the graphic options to respond to the surveys. Shouldn't the strongly agree, disagree include it depends? Perhaps not quantitatively useful, but almost always my reactions to surveys and would have been true as a kid.
Right. No, I agree. I think, again, quantitatively useful is the key term there, because you're trying to quantify everything. This was a study, so you don't really want these kind of like minimal, like wishy-washy maybes within the Likert scale. But yeah, I mean, I agree, because there are gray areas in life, but for the sake of quantifying like attitude and research, I wouldn't want to put it in there in one of my surveys. That's just my opinion.
Thanks. There is a question in the chat which is tangentially related, but could be interesting to discuss in the context of neurodivergent literacy, especially. So this person asks, basically, how do you handle a student's inappropriate phone usage in the classroom when it's bothering people? So I think maybe I can expand on this question a little bit just to add, like, you know, there's people who are texting, scrolling, Instagram, things like that. And that, of course, is, I think, what we would consider inappropriate usage on the phone during a classroom setting. However, there are a lot of settings in which that's not considered inappropriate, and especially for students and learners with disabilities. Sometimes there is they have programs on their phones or on their computers that you know, assistive technology that allow them to interact more fully with the professor and the content that's being shared. But other students may react to that negatively, feeling as if it's distracting to their mode of learning. So maybe I can, if that's okay with the person who asked the question, morph it a little to ask if you've ever encountered in your teaching experiences, all three of you, having to navigate a situation like that, where there is, you know, adaptive technology being used in the classroom, and perhaps some students feeling negatively about that.
Yeah, I think for the most part, in the citation needed class, they can use their phones, but they just don't. It's also because we've developed a kind of culture. And in the beginning, I really was like, we're an analog class, right? But also none of the students who I'm working with need or use an assistive or adaptive technology. I have had situations where there's an access support of some kind. Maybe it's like a squishy ball or the ability to go out into the hallway or some kind of, just extra support. I think that, and then like another student has seen it and been like, why do they get to have it? And as much as I can, I just say like, you can have it too. But when in a situation where I can't, right? I think like for me, I wasn't considered a neurodivergent child. Like that wasn't, something that my teachers were thinking about. And I would have really benefited from some of the assistive things that people had and access tools. So I try to make it open, but in a situation where I can't, we just talk about everyone is different and we all need different tools and resources to focus and to be engaged. And this is what this person needs. And if you feel like you're really needing that, like maybe we can have another conversation about that at a different time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a different situation in that, at the kind of public school level, you need administrators who are going to kind of have policy surrounding cell phone use, and two, enforcement of that policy. So there has been, times where I've literally just taken it right out of their hands in a general education English classroom. I'm like, because they're not using it the right way. They're literally texting something totally inappropriate to a friend. So there have been moments where that occurs. With kids with disabilities, I mean, when I was in a self-contained classroom, they might have had their phone in their pocket, but they never brought it out while I was teaching. There was too much, there were too many adults around, for one, because they had all those supports. But I think culturally, we're in a crisis with the phones. I think the science is out on it. I don't think kids should have it. I think if they need assistive tech, there should be a school provided, iPad that would provide that. I also am like, I mean, this just brings up so much. I'm sorry. Like the AI, like that shouldn't exist, period. Like it's stolen goods. Like those people should be in jail. However, like it's because it does exist, it should be accessible to kids with disabilities. However, that should be on an IEP, or a 504. It shouldn't be a free-for-all of constant, consistent plagiarism. So I think they're muddy waters. But I do feel that the phones really don't belong in schools. That's my opinion. The assistive tech can be accessed in other situations, school provided technology. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Warren, did you want to add to that? If not, I have another question for you too. So, oh, I can't hear you, Warren. Sorry, you're muted.
I'm fine. You can go to your next
Okay.
question.
So I don't see anything else from the chat. So this was something that came up for me. So yesterday, there was a session called Analog Manipulations, and the artist Rafaela Della Olga was they showed a video of their practice using a typewriter, and there was this like repetitive motion to I don't know if anyone else saw it, the letters and the numbers that they were using, and I saw a lot of overlap with your work, Warren, that you were showing us today, and Rafaela's work has this audio component to it that brought up a lot for me as somebody, who perhaps gets easily distracted by audio stimuli when you're in a situation where you're trying to read. And then I was thinking also of, you had mentioned in a previous conversation with the panelists that a lot of your work helps people who don't have dyslexia understand the experience of a person with dyslexia. So I don't know, I saw a connection there where I was like, Rafaela is demonstrating exactly how I feel sometimes when, you know, I'm trying to read something or mainly for me, do a math problem. And if I hear any kind of little noise, I'm lost, I'm done. And this idea that one poem you had with the letters were going like this, that's what happens with
living with Alzheimer's.
Yes, thank you. That happens a lot for me with numbers. And I guess my question is for you is, have you ever thought of experimenting with dyscalculia or you know, trying to demonstrate dyscalculia to people in the way with, I know I can't even imagine what that would look like without the language attached to it, but if that's something that you have ever thought about.
No, I haven't, but I would be interested in it. You know, I mean, I've tried to portray Alzheimer's a little bit and dyslexia, and now I've done this whole stroke broca aphasia project, and I'm curious if you found the soundtrack disturbing or made it more difficult for you to read that last excerpt that I played in the Riveted in the Word.
So yeah, if you don't mind me being honest, it did. But not in a sense that I felt like it ruined it for me in any way. It adds like something to it that I don't know if it's meant to be added or not. Like I don't know. I can imagine a person experiencing that and feeling this sense of calm, and you know, it's like an interference. Yeah, but yeah, exactly. For me, it's sort of like an interference, like a white noise in the background that makes it hard to focus on the words, especially because they're also moving at the same time.
So you would have been a good beta tester for us. But, you know, it's part of the experiment in what I'm doing in that electronic book, which is previously I've done books that have had audio augmentations and animation. So you have the printed book, and then but you can go and also watch the animation in relation to it, or read or go to the QR code in the last book that I did with Adina Karasik and hear her performing the poem after having read it yourself silently. So you have that sort of different kind of reading experience. Here, I love the idea of a book having a soundtrack, but unlike a, let's say, video of watching a performer perform a text, embody a text as an actor, here you are still the reader. That's why I call this a book, because you're still the reader. And I'm even switching off modalities. Half the time you're reading at your own pace in these columns of text, and the other half you're watching these animations that are at a fixed time, like inside the protagonist's brain. And I hope that the music doesn't just kind of telegraph how you're supposed to feel, but be another kind of emotional part of the storytelling. And I think people might react differently to having that soundtrack on there. And but I look forward to portraying all kinds of other experiences. And how did you call it?
I'm not even sure really how to pronounce it. Dyscalculia.
Yeah.
I've heard dyscalculia. It's basically dyslexia, but with numbers.
And I look forward to seeing
Yeah,
Natalia's.
I can't even imagine if you asked me how to display it. Like, I don't even know how I would do it. You know, that would be a really big challenge, but it would be really fascinating. So perhaps maybe our last question that's in the chat for the panelist. Kudos to you for channeling your insufficiencies into such productive and brilliant and artistic outcomes. I grew up in the 50s, able to read pretty easily, but if not, would probably still be illiterate given the attitudes and lack of creative resources at the time. You were all of different generations. Can you comment on what it was like from that standpoint, if not too personal?
I'm happy to start. So I was born in 1990, and I went to a public school, and I had a bad time. I think like as, you know, being socialized as a girl child and being pretty obedient, I was like overlooked around a lot of the things that were happening for me. And I was in third grade when I really started to like suffer. There were these timed multiplication table sheets that we had to do. And it was like we had a minute to do them. And I just remember them being everywhere. Like they were just all over the page. And my teacher that year was not great. And so there was like a ice cream scoops on the wall for each student once you got your table, and I was at the end and we were all going to get an ice cream. Like it's literally just like you couldn't make it up. It was so bad. And I ended up moving to a Montessori based charter school after that, and I was kind of cared for in a different way. I also went to see a specialist who does like different kinds of exercises to strengthen tracking. Yeah, but I've gone, you know, I was just graduated from a grad program, and my like convergent stuff really came back as I was reading a ton more. And so when I went to kind of seek resources, the resources haven't actually changed that much, which is a curiosity to me because I feel like it's, you know, it's been 20 years. So I would expect that some of the, you know, and I think it's like 10% of the population have some level of convergence insufficiency. It's like pretty common, but I think a lot of people just experience headaches from it and don't really understand what it is. So it's still something that I think there's, you know, not the level of care for that's needed. Yeah, but that's, I guess, was my experience.
Yeah, I'm really thankful that you shared that, Ari. I was curious about, you know, what your experience was like in school. I remember in my grad program for education, somebody had kind of looked at just qualitative research surrounding dyslexia, and like one thing that always came up for this, like I think they surveyed maybe like 30 or 40 people with dyslexia, and it just kept coming up, this terror of being called on to read, you know. So like these just terrible like systematic approaches toward like education, I think can be really damaging. Yeah. I grew up, I went to a Catholic school growing up, which again, I had a pretty terrible experience there. Especially like as a gay man, like it just wasn't right for me. And then like compounding that, later on, like my father had bipolar disorder and kind of had his own issues, and I think that's what kind of enabled me to be a special educator later. And it took me a while to make those connections, but later on, you know, I had moved to Cape Cod. I was newly laid off in like 2008. So yeah, I was born in 1984, so I'm a little bit older than Ari. But but like I was laid off. I had no job, and I ended up just kind of falling ass backwards into this like residential school for kids with disabilities, and I absolutely loved it. Like I worked resi, like that's like you earn your stripes there. Like it's tough, you know. But I eventually I had to ask myself, why do I like this? Why am I okay at it? People were telling me I was good at it. Why? And then I had to kind of do my own digging and realize that like, oh, like you're good at it because you had some practice as a kid with your dad's bipolar disorder, or what were you, you know. But yeah, my experience was very similar to that of typical Catholic schools. I mean, it was very it was rigorous in grammar and writing and things like that, which I think definitely benefited me, but very conservative in other aspects that absolutely destroyed me. So, yeah. Warren, I'm interested to hear from you.
Well, I was born in 1955, and I had a sort of low sense of myself, having been placed in the second to the bottom class year after year after year in the kind of ranking that they do. And there was not at that time good diagnosis, so there was no discussion of that the way I was reading was different, and or synesthesia, having any understanding of that. And so I developed a rich imaginary life. And it wasn't really until I had a teacher in college who believed in me that I felt like I had belief in myself, really. So being a teacher and the power of teaching was sparked by the way he helped me feel good about myself and showed me that I had something to offer. My Dennis, my collaborator on several books, though, really has, dyslexia and was left back, and it was so incredibly painful for him. And to have overcome that, to be a writer and to be an investigative journalist and a person of letters, is an incredible story in and of itself. And yet that lack of confidence is always sort of under the skin. Not that I should speak for him, but I did.
Thank you for all sharing those experiences. I bet there's a lot of us on this meeting who can identify with some of the things that you said. So I really appreciate that. And thank you everyone for coming to the session and for your lovely questions. The recording will be posted to the Center for Book Arts YouTube channel, and there will be captions available for the recording via YouTube. So if you do need those captions, hopefully the recording will better serve you. But yeah, with that, we're concluding the Contemporary Artist Book Conference sessions. And thank you so much. Appreciate everything. And I hope you all have a lovely weekend.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Gianna. Thank you to the Center for Book Arts.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks everyone for coming.